When I was a student at Lancaster University, Ninian Smart founded the Religious Studies Department, and so I was in the first year of graduates in religious studies in Britain, and it began with a couple of other scholars and Ninian running the department, and then in the second year he hired James Dickey to come and teach. And James had been a student of literature, of Spanish literature. He had studied in Spain for his PhD and studying medieval Spanish literature, where Spain was ruled by the Muslims. He became a Muslim convert. And he spoke English with a Scottish Arabic accent, if you can believe it. And he was a great character, a fantastic teacher, who taught Islam in a believing sense. He truly believed and believes in Islam. Now, you very rarely get professors in religious studies departments who actually believe in the religion that they're teaching. James did. He made it very clear from the outset that he was a Muslim and he was teaching Islam as Muslims would understand Islam. He really disliked what he saw as the watering down of Islam by scholars like Montgomery Watt and Gibb at Oxford. He would talk about glib Gibb, because Gibb, the great Oxford scholar of Islam, really, in his view, muted Islam. He tried to take away from it. So James insisted that the first great miracle of Islam was the Quran, and the second great miracle were the conquests. And this is something which Muslims would traditionally believe in. This was a traditional Muslim claim. It's not that Islam was spread by the sword, but it was that God enabled Muslim rulers to pacify the rest of the world. And this is the way in which the world ought to go, that eventually Islam ought to, Islam meaning submission, submission to God, ought to be spread throughout the world. And Dickey was very proud of this. His Arabic name was Yaqub Zaki. It still is, and as you pointed out, you can go on the internet and you can find him, and people say all sorts of horrible things about him. And he's certainly made a lot of provocative statements. A while ago, he was interviewed in Britain, and someone asked him about Islamic terrorists, and he said, well, you know, really I wouldn't mind if they blew up 10 Downing Street, except it would destroy a beautiful Georgian house. And everybody took offense at this. But in actual fact, I think I wasn't there, I didn't hear it. I think he was joking in many ways. But he did appreciate culture, and he liked to provoke people to think. I mean, what is Islam about? He didn't see Islam as a destructive force, he didn't see it as a terrorist force, but he did see it as a militant force. And he did see Islam becoming the world religion. At that time, he thought Islam was very much in disarray, and he thought there were all sorts of reasons for this, but he taught Islam straight. Now, since then, Islam's become very popular in universities, and you've got all sorts of people teaching, and many Muslims teaching in universities. Montgomery Watt and Gibb were both non-Muslims talking about Islam. Dickey was one of the few teachers at that point who was a Muslim teaching Islam. He also took seriously the supernatural. He believed that you couldn't separate Islam from the supernatural. He believed in jinns, he believed in vampires, in fact. He wrote a wonderful book of vampire stories. So, you know, this was a character. He was a controversial character, he remains controversial, but he was essentially a very nice man, a very kind man. He respected his students, whatever you believed, whether if you didn't believe anything, if you were a Christian, whatever you were, he respected people, and he treated them fairly and well. And so he was a good example of, maybe one can say, a good Muslim who can be very provocative.